through October for the fall season, and then in October we pretty much right away start the winter season. So yeah, I
Hello. Welcome to Tea&Talk, the big story of small things, a century of miniatures in the U.S. Today I'm introducing Diego Fajardo, Collections Manager at the Museum of Miniature Houses in Carmel, Indiana. Diego has been dedicated to history, mentoring, and teaching in various institutions for more than a decade, having spent some of that time at the Indianapolis Children's Museum and the Indiana State Museum. Since joining the Museum of Miniature Houses in 2022, Diego has helped safeguard the thousands of miniatures in their collection, ensuring the preservation of these tiny works of art for future generations. We're excited to have him here today, so please join me in welcoming Diego Fajardo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diego, as it says there. I'm the collections manager, as she said. Although I work at a museum for miniatures, I am not a miniaturist myself. And my main history with miniatures is as an ardent lover of Legos. Instead, I primarily come at my work as a museum worker. Through my work, I've gained a deep and abiding respect for miniatures. Many people have been surprised that I haven't taken up miniatures as a pastime, and more when I say I suspect I never will. I don't see this as a contradiction, but as a sign of miniatures' deserved place as an art form. It doesn't take me being a miniaturist to appreciate the art of miniatures. Just as it doesn't take a painter to feel the power of Van Gogh. In today's talk, I hope it opens you up to seeing miniatures in a new light. So I'm going to start today's talk with some background on the Museum of Miniature Houses and the present state of miniatures museums more broadly. Then we will talk about the unique challenges of the art form in a museum context. And finally, we will go through a history of fine art miniatures through the work of the mother of the art form, Narcissa Niblack Thorne. Museum of Miniature Houses and Other Collections Incorporated resides in Carmel, Indiana. It opened in 1993 out of a farmhouse that had been converted into a dentist's office. In addition to being a museum for miniatures, it is also a miniature museum. It was renovated in 2009 with the facade that you see here, giving our largest gallery space. While we are now in the heart of the Arts and Design District of Carmel, when we opened, Main Street was a small street of a small town, and the district grew up around us. And I like to think we were trailblazers in the arts portion of that district name. In addition to the collecting museum, we have the last remaining dedicated miniatures shop in Indiana, and one of the only few remaining in the Midwest. We also host an annual attic sale, collecting miniatures throughout the year and miniatures-related objects as a big fundraiser. And that is actually coming up on April 25th, so mark your calendars. We deal in fine art scale miniatures. Miniatures are created to scale, so everything in a piece is as proportional to the things around it. The goal is to create an illusion of life. Most pieces are made in a 1-inch scale, also known as 1/12. So 1 foot of real space is equal to 1 inch of space in the miniature. 3 miniaturists came together to start the museum. Susie Moffett continues to serve as the board president. She is on the left of this image. Suzanne Lansoff in the middle has retired from her museum duties in the last couple of years. And Nancy Lesh tragically passed away in 1999. Each artist's approach to miniatures is different, which set us up for a wonderful, holistic view of the art form. Suzanne creates classically beautiful miniatures. She has a really quality eye for pieces and is able to really make wonderful scenes. You can see in the middle of that one there. Suzanne, sorry, they're both named Suzanne. Susie. Susie holds a lot of whimsy in her scenes And she creates a lot of fantastical scenes as well, very imaginative. So her Unicorn Museum is on the left there. And Nancy Lesh created works from her own life, including a recreation of her childhood home and her lake house. And it is from their foundation that we get to build. We are not the only museum of our kind. There are several other miniatures museums throughout the country. Some notable examples are the Mini Time Museum of Miniatures in Tucson, Arizona, the Denver Museum of Miniatures, Dolls, and Toys in my home state of Colorado. And each does a wonderful job of supporting local miniature artists and giving a platform to the worldwide work of artisans. But I also want to toot my own museum's horn a little. At the Museum of Miniature Houses, our focus is on the art form of scale dollhouses, while others incorporate a blend of artisan work, play dollhouses, and other dolls and toys, as suggested by the name of the National Museum of Toys and Miniatures in Kansas City, Missouri. We at MMH have a drive to focus on the fine artwork. I shout out these other museums, not to say that ours is better, although you are welcome to come to your own conclusions, but because we are all better off by being the miniatures community. So please, wherever you travel, check out, see if they have a miniatures museum nearby. But before you do, check out the Museum of Miniature Houses and Other Collections Incorporated. That is 111 East Main Street, Carmel, Indiana. Nice and easy to remember. Take a sip of water so we can soak the address in. There are some quirks of the job. Working with miniatures is quite different as opposed to working with other art forms, especially in a museum context. Miniatures have been dominated by club hobbyists, which makes for some challenges as a museum worker. And for each of these quirks, we're also going to be looking at a specific case study. The first quirk of miniatures has to do with attribution. As a hobbyist-driven art form, many feel like their work is not fit for a signature. Further, it is miniature pieces, and so it is physically hard to fit a signature. But our case study for attribution today isn't, like here, a single object by a single artist. This is Mother's Workroom by Janet King. After the talk, hopefully you'll be able to see it on our side table as well, get a closer look. This textile workroom is based on the Little House on the Prairie book series. There are almost no miniatures that are not collaborative works. Frequently, the structure is made from a kit, or it is individually made, sometimes commissioned. From there, the furniture is mass manufactured, artisan made, or possibly assembled from a kit and hand upholstered, for example. And from any of those starting points, it is typically modified by the artist. As we look for who made various of the pieces in this work, we can see how many people's work contributes to just a single room. And for every piece that we have the artisan information for in this room, there are more that we don't know. How do we determine whose work to attribute and whose work gets lost? How do we properly attribute a whole house's worth of furniture? How do we acknowledge when artists are unknown? These are ongoing questions. The next quirk is when telling when a piece is complete. Miniatures are, just as in furnishing in a full-scale home, never a completed process. These passion projects are living works of art, never built for a museum setting. Artists will arrange and rearrange a piece, replace furniture inside, and even decorate for Christmas. Dollhouses go under renovations, just as people houses do. Maybe it's changing the carpeting for hardwood or installing lighting. In this picture here, one of our colleagues, Carl Sahlberg, is redoing the wiring of the house, which involves, as you can see, taking out all of the flooring and much of the wallpapering. The picture of a piece that may come from a magazine is not necessarily going to reflect what it looks like when it comes to us at the museum. And so as a curator, it is not unusual for curation to also be occurring in a piece as well as throughout an exhibit. Here we have two versions of the furnishing of a single room in the expansive mansion, the Sahlberg. If you go to the museum tomorrow, it will look different from either of these still. The Sahlberg was handmade by Jimmy Landers, as well as with contributions from many of the skilled people you see listed here. The piece was donated empty and has been filled over time with high quality pieces with no room of their own. It used to be standard procedure to augment pieces that came into the collection this way, but that is now something that we only leave for special conditions. Coming from hobbyists, much of this information is getting documented. It's not getting documented. What is going into a piece, what is modified, when was it made, even what a piece looks like when it was put together is lost in transit. Museums are delicate, or miniatures are delicate, and any movement causes disruptions. Knowing this, people will pack the furniture and the house or room separately, and the interior design becomes a fun little puzzle for me to solve later. Especially with no standard practices for really any of this, it is our job as museum professionals to over-document, so that way the future Diego Fajardos can have an easier go of it. These challenges stem from one key part of miniatures I was not expecting: how often artists do not see themselves as artists. Artisan furniture makers are the ones most often seen as artists, with the people filling boxes and houses of that furniture seeing themselves as collectors forming exhibits. Quite often, miniaturists will refer to a room box as an exhibit rather than a piece, which still trips me up
as a museum professional. There is already an institutional uphill battle when it comes to fine art miniatures. It is a niche art form that, writ large, museums and mainstream art history have so far missed. And yet, you will likely see miniatures in any museum you go to. At the least, architectural models of museums are common. Further, there are more typical 1-inch scale fine art miniatures in plenty of museums. The Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago has Colleen Moore's Fairy Castle. The Museum of the City of New York has the Stettheimer Dollhouse, and the Smithsonian has the Doll's House. In each of these cases, the miniatures are prominent, but they are removed from the context of miniatures as an art form. Miniatures museums have the unique position to bridge this gap. However, they too have largely been the domain of clubs and hobbyists. The Museum of Miniature Houses was started by miniaturists for the preservation of the Indiana miniatures scene. Notably, Susie Moffett is a founding member of the Hoosier Minimizers, a long-running miniatures club. This local origin to miniatures museums explains why there are so many small museums across the country, each serving their specific community history. It also means that the information about miniatures is stored locally within the living memory of these separate communities. These museums, as spaces for hobbyists, have been made up of both the work of miniaturists and the collections that inspire their work. For example, mass-manufactured dollhouses like this tin house from the 1960s, and non-dollhouse scale dolls like these Polly Pockets from my wife's collection from the 1990s. Museums host both the play and the fine art in the same context. The insularity of the hobby is something put upon miniaturists and has since been reinforced by miniaturists.
Why this has happened to miniaturists? It's important to say, and say clearly, there is a gendered aspect to it. Miniatures are taken less seriously as an art form, in no small part because they are primarily done by women. This is the awful fate of so many crafts, from fabric arts to culinary arts. So, in an attempt to further the formality of the art form, I want to introduce you all to the mother of fine art miniatures. There's really only one place to start when it comes to the history of miniatures, and that is with the life and work of Narcissa Niblack Thorne. The importance of Niblack Thorne on the trajectory of miniatures cannot be overstated. It is because of her passion and the workshop she created that fine art miniatures have taken the shape they hold now. The history of fine art miniatures can be seen almost in its entirety through the lens of Thorne's life and work. The impact it has had ripples through today. When Narcissa Niblack Thorne was born in Vincennes, Indiana in 1882, miniatures were not the art form we showcase at the Museum of Miniature Houses. In the US, dolls and doll houses were still almost entirely toys for children. European scale miniatures were artisan, individual, and luxury items. But the fascination with miniatures as playthings carried with Narcissa as a young girl to inspire the art she would make as an adult. Narcissa married James Ward Thorne, heir to the Montgomery Ward department store fortune, which gave her space and money to travel and pursue her artwork. It was travel to Europe that once again sparked that childhood fascination. On a visit to England, she saw the then recently completed Queen Mary's Doll's House. Queen Mary's Doll's House is a pivotal piece, and really the only piece arguably more important than Thorne's own work. So it's worth taking a moment to talk about it here. This house, which was started in 1920 and completed in 1924, was made for the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom and has been on display ever since. Over the course of its first year on display, the only time outside of its home in Windsor Castle, over 1.5 million people visited it. It combined the tailor-made work of hundreds of artists and is still regarded as the single most impressive miniature. The English imperial measurement system, with its feet and inches, was still being used in its home country of England, so the Queen Mary's Doll's House can also be seen as cementing the 1-inch scale most common through doll houses today, meaning 1 inch of miniature will be equal to 1 foot of real space. In 1930, after she had seen Queen Mary's Doll's House, Thorne purchased 2 small bronze chandeliers that were made with semi-precious stones while she was traveling in Rome. These pieces inspired her to make her first shadow box that same year. And not 2 years later, in 1932, Thorne exhibited her miniature work for the first time. 10 shadow boxes displayed in the Ackerman Galleries in Chicago to benefit the Architects Emergency Relief Fund in response to the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, she employed a team of artists to create room boxes, including the famous 68 Thorne rooms exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago. Now, this is the big asterisk from miniatures' absence from the world of art museums. The Thorne rooms at the Art Institute have been a staple of the collection as well as the display since their creation, and it is possible to directly trace the influence these rooms have had across the nation for the development of miniatures. Her work largely showcases ornate displays of American and European architecture inspired by the grand rooms and estates she saw during her travels. So, in order to spend some time with these rooms, we're going to play a game, real or miniature. The rules are simple. I am going to show you a picture of a room, and you are going to guess whether it is a real historic house or a Thorne room exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago. Clear? All right. Room number 1. Take a little time. Notice all the details. So what do we think? Do we think it's real? Real? Do you think it's mini? So we're pretty evenly split, real or mini. This one is real. This is a historic house in Kentucky. All right. Let's see. Let's see our next one. Is this a historic estate or a miniature? Notice all the fine details, all the colors. Do we think it's real? A handful of reals. Do we think it's miniature? Okay, most of us think it's miniature. That's correct. This is a miniature by Narcissa Niblack Thorne in her workshop at the Art Institute in Chicago. All right, this is a tricky one. Lots to look over. All right, do we think it is real?
Real.
Do we think it's miniature? Okay, still more for miniature, but it's pretty even. This one is a miniature. All right, we're halfway through. Got 3 more rooms to look at. Is this one a real or a miniature? I have to say, I really enjoy hearing all the murmuring as you guess. Who thinks it is real? A couple real. Who thinks it's miniature? Okay, I don't think this is miniature. You're right, this is a miniature. Was it the portrait that gave it away? The rug thickness, yes. That's one of my favorite ways to look at whether something is a miniature, the rug thickness. There's a lot of techniques that you can have in miniatures that can recreate the same precision and especially the same thinness as the real scale. But rugs in particular and other textiles are incredibly difficult to do because we already try and make those as thin as we possibly can. So hopefully as you look in the textiles in the room boxes to the side there, in a bit you'll also be able to see some of those. Okay, 2 more. Let's see, do we think this is a real or miniature? Second. All right, do we think it's real?
Real.
Okay, we've got plenty of people thinking it's real. Do we think it's a miniature? I'd say this one's pretty half-half, even. If you were looking at the carpets, you would be correct. This is also a miniature. I love seeing the metal work, typically pewter work, in that cabinet in the back. You really get to see all of the different techniques on display, from the beams overhead, the metal work, the wood work, the textile work. All right, last one. Do we think this is real or miniature? All right, who thinks this is real? Who thinks this is miniature? Okay. If you thought this was miniature, that was correct. This is an extra tricky one. The door is intentionally open, and it is a picture in the background. Congratulations, everyone. So now that you've gotten some time to spend with these, hopefully you can understand how these rooms have connected with so many. Before being settled in the Art Institute at Chicago, these rooms also traveled. As they traveled, people got to be inspired by their artistry, just as she was inspired by the Queen Mary's Doll's House. Orson Welles, the filmmaker behind Citizen Kane, saw her rooms at the Chicago World's Fair and credited them to inspiring his distinctive lighting. Wes Anderson, director of films such as the Grand Budapest Hotel, is known for a prolific use of miniatures that he directly credits with the Thorne rooms at the Art Institute for inspiring. Countless future miniaturists saw these rooms on display and as they traveled, and from that developed a lifelong obsession, including museum co-founder Susie Moffett. We are at present still only 1 degree removed from the impact of Narcissa Niblack Thorne. After the Great Depression, Niblack Thorne's workshop created room boxes to be auctioned off for charitable causes. 2 of her favorite charities were the Chicago Women's Auxiliary and the Chicago Children's Hospital. She also did charities for various architecture funds, which harkens back to her first show, which was to benefit Architecture Relief Fund. She continued to work on miniatures until her death in 1966, though in the last decades, she found it hard to find artists to join her workshop, slowing her work and limiting her scale. This, of course, does tie into the complications of attribution that I talked about earlier. These pieces were workshop collaborations, not unlike a film or a mural where the work of many is condensed into one name. We know she was involved in crafting pieces, but even as a director, designer, and stylist, her work is still worth being celebrated. We don't know much about who worked in her shop, but there is one notable exception. Her primary artisan and closest colleague was a man named Eugene Kupchak. His handiwork is part of what elevated Thorne's rooms to the level of quality they are known for. After Thorne's death, he continued his miniature work, hosting workshops and creating commissions for places such as the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, whose original building was recreated here. The Propylaeum Carriage House no longer hosts the Children's Museum. Instead, the Children's Museum is 5 floors and over 7 acres in the mid-north of Indianapolis. In between those two, it was in 4 or 5 other houses. 4. My resident Children's Museum history expert here to help me. Now, 100 years into the Children's Museum's existence, Kupchak's work allows us to imagine what it was like being in the space.
And his recreation of 81 collections objects serves to show what items were on display and how they were displayed. Kupchak should be considered an artist of note in his own right, and his ties to Thorne as a sign of both of their artistry. Thorne and her workshop created over 100 room boxes, earning critical acclaim for their ornate nature and attention to detail. Her work helped create the wave of miniature artists and hobbyists that we showcase at MMH and in miniature museums across the country. Miniatures are the art form we know them to be today, in no small part thanks to the work and passion of Narcissa Niblack Thorne. At the Museum of Miniature Houses, we are proud to display 2 pieces in our collection by Narcissa Niblack Thorne and her workshop, King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and Modern Bar Scene. I want to point out a few details that make these pieces noteworthy parts of our collection and indicative of the legacy Thorne has left behind. King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn was made in the 1930s, likely 31 or 32, during the early part of Niblack Thorne's career. It was gifted by Narcissa Niblack Thorne to her friend and Chicago socialite, Marion McCormick, which was added to the wall of her Lakeshore Drive condo, which had been built in 1926. Through the 1930s, Thorne was experimenting. This scene has lighting, which is very uncommon for her work, and largely abandoned by the time of her work for the Art Institute. A brief aside, these lights have been replaced with LEDs, which run cool. You can see how small of a space these boxes are, and there have historically been many incidents with hot light bulbs burning pieces. This change in technology has done so much for the preservation of miniatures. Changing light bulbs has become a big part of my job.
And also a little part. The light bulbs are very, very small. But it isn't just the lights that are the most unusual experiment in this room. The most notable in this scene are the dolls of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Any form of figurine is very rare for Thorne's work, and none are featured in the Art Institute rooms. When Thorne used dolls in her scenes, it was almost always paper dolls, as we see in the middle image here. And when she did employ figurines, they were usually not as detailed, which we see on the left image here. She made a set of rooms, each centered on a dog. So there is a chance that the Pekingese at the center of this piece came first, with the dolls added later. Although the specificity of the title, Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, written in Narcissa Thorne's hand on the same paper and seal that she used with all of her rooms, suggests that the dolls are original to the room. No other dolls of this style are known in Thorne rooms before or since. The dolls bear no maker's mark, and the known documentation and evidence within the room gives no further clues as to the doll's origin. This could have been an experiment by Thorne. They could have been made by herself or an associate. They could have been requested by McCormick, or they could have been added later by McCormick. This is one of the mysteries that the lack of attribution in so many miniatures leads to. However, we do know a very important part of the piece. We have its full provenance. The piece remained in McCormick's condo after it was given to her by Thorne. When Mrs. McCormick sold her condo to the Van Mells family, she included the room box. When Mrs. Helen Van Mels died, her son Derek removed the box to ensure it would not be destroyed or lost to the condo's next owner, according to his mother's wishes. In 2024, Derek Van Mels reached out to the Museum of Miniature Houses with the understanding that we were already caring for one of Thorne's rooms, and the room was delivered later that same year. This means that the room has not been on public display before coming to the Museum of Miniature Houses. As straightforward as that story seems, it is incredible that this piece has a complete provenance. Thorne was not yet an artist shown at the Art Institute. She was making room boxes for her friends. The stories of this kind of hobbyist art are not usually respected and kept for 90 years. Further, in so many documents I have found about Marion McCormick, and even Narcissa herself, they are not even given their names. Instead, they are referred to as Mrs. Chauncey McCormick and Mrs. James Ward Thorne. We can say that was normal for the time, and it was. But that does not negate how it erases these women's personal histories, especially as some institutions still credit the work of the artist Narcissa Niblack Thorne to her husband's name. It is lucky for us that Narcissa Niblack Thorne used the same signature card across the whole of her career, or it would likely be impossible to verify the story. So imagine how it is, with so many boxes that show up at the museum, from attics and basements, with no signatures and no stories remaining. For too many, people cared about stories like this too late, and the information has been lost forever. These are the stakes of our work. This is the importance of museums. The counterpoint to this can be seen in the first Thorne room acquired by the museum, this modern bar scene. This piece was likely made in the 1950s when Narcissa Niblack Thorne was creating room boxes to be auctioned off for charitable causes. Samuel Levin and Mrs. Samuel Levin bought this piece from a friend of theirs who was the original person to successfully bid on it during the charity auction. We do not know who originally placed the successful bid, nor what charity it was supporting, which are key factors in building a complete story for this piece. The same aspects that make the story of the King Henry piece so compelling are missing here. The harmful practices of the past continue to hurt us today. The missing information is a product of time, yes, but so too of the carelessness of a world that does not respect women enough to name them. The world's preeminent miniature artist, whose work is built into the walls of the Art Institute, who hired artists through the Great Depression and sold her pieces only for charity, rather than for her own benefit, does not even have the charity she was supporting known. And Libby was her name, Mrs. Samuel Levin, born Libby Berger. Her name was not featured in our databases, and that oversight has been fixed. Narcissa never got to see how far her reach has come. The medium of 1-inch scale fine art miniatures she pioneered reached their heyday in the 1980s. A co-founder of the Museum of Miniature Houses, Susie Moffett, has led a life that encapsulates the art form in the intervening time. When she was a little girl, Moffett saw Thorne's rooms as they traveled to fundraise for the war effort around 1943. Like Narcissa was inspired by the Queen Mary's Doll's House, Susie kept that fascination through her childhood and early adulthood life. In the early 1970s, this fascination found a home when she came across a sign-up for a new miniature club while at a model train show with her husband. This group became the Hoosier Mini Misers. Clubs like these pushed the members to think big with their miniatures, such as the Mini Misers Condo Project, pictured here, where each member created a multi-story mixed-use condo that would come together with the others into a whole city block. Magazines, shops, and shows gave these communities around the US the ability to meet and mingle. Through the 1980s, miniatures were, by some counts, the second most popular hobby, only behind stamp collecting. Leading into the 1990s, the first generation of people who had been artists and collectors started dying, and their pieces were languishing in attics or being tossed out by families who knew nothing about the hobby. Others were retiring, and the memory of their work was at risk of being lost to time. Susie and the founders of what would become the Museum of Miniature Houses saw this starting and wanted to give their art and the art around them a home. Like many classical museums, the initial collections came from the founders and the miniatures communities around them. Even now, the vast majority of our collections come from donations. In the era of miniatures museums, the hobby has been on the decline. Through the new millennium, there has been little new interest, and it has largely been held up by the same people who were active during the 1970s and 80s. Interestingly, we may be on the upswing. The novelty of miniatures has crossed with the artistic minds of the internet generation. Through the COVID lockdown, many people found book nooks and other newer kit miniatures as a way to pass the time indoors. These new kind of kit miniatures, like the coastline cottage pictured here, have everything needed for a complete piece. Lighting, furniture, and instructions make for an easy on-ramp to the hobby. They are not made to 1-inch scale, typically they are much smaller, and the scale is usually not compatible between pieces. However, as an entry-level activity, it has pushed people to thinking about miniatures, and that push has continued. People sharing their creations online have inspired more, just like the clubs of yesteryear. While the forms of these new miniatures are different, I can attest through my time at the Museum of Miniature Houses, I have seen people walk away with the same inspiration that carried Niblack Thorne around 100 years ago. Because we get to feature her work, I've been able to see her impact continue. And these artists she's inspired are now getting to inspire a burgeoning wave of miniaturists, becoming interested in miniatures as an art form in addition to a hobby. Thorne's work is still inspiring people to see miniatures as art. This is a pivotal time for museums like mine as we seek to build the narratives of the past to inspire the future. My hope is that you too now see the artistic value of miniatures, that you understand why this typically hobbyist craft deserves to be respected and admired with the same appreciation we give to paintings and sculpture. I hope you can all carry this message out into the world with you and share it with others. You'll never know when you'll be planting the seed and curiosity of the next generation of miniaturists. And you may find yourself noticing miniatures more as you explore other museums. I know as soon as you walk out of these doors, there are some miniatures. But I also hope you'll take the effort to come to the Museum of Miniature Houses. But either way, I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to learn a little bit about the history and the nuance of miniatures, as well as the folks at Minnetrista for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Thank you all. Now we have some time to